It's the fourth game of the World Series, and the human player really needs some help right now. They're one run ahead, and they need to maintain that lead in order to tie up the series. But the cyborg player has managed to put 3 threatened hits on base. Is the human player going to be able to maintain his lead and tie up the series? Or is the cyborg player going to pull back up with those 3 threatened hits and be close to taking home the entire thing? If this sounds even remotely exciting to you, welcome to Baseball Highlights 2045. This is a deck building game by Mike Fitzgerald, as he wants to insist on the back of all of the cards that he's got going on here. And it is a combination of baseball and deck building. And frankly, it works really well. It is genuinely a great way of adapting the sport of baseball into a unique sort of gameplay. Well, not so much a unique sort of gameplay style, but it adds its own little twists to the deck building formula that I really appreciate, and I'd like to take the opportunity to talk to you about that. But I will say this right away. If you don't have at least a general understanding of how baseball works, you're probably not going to get much out of this one, because all of the little neat things that it does will be kind of lost to someone who doesn't really pay attention to baseball. So it's not really something that you can just go and take into a random game shop and be like, hey, do you guys want to play this with me? Because they just kind of won't get it, which is unfortunate, because there's a lot of interesting strategy here that would be great to play around with. A lot of great mechanics as well. And to explain what I mean, we're going to have a game, have a quick, inning of baseball, shall we say. So, this is how the game works. We start on my turn, because I'm currently playing the solo mode against the AI, although it's not really AI, but we'll get to how that works in a bit. And since it's my turn, I have the ability to do a few things, but before I do that, I need to explain what the cards are like. So here's a card. It has a name, a town, and a type, which is pretty easy to understand. The cost in red and the money it provides in green. But the most important things are down the bottom here. So we've got the effect, the threatened hits, the speed, and whether or not this card can be a pinch hit card. We'll get to what the pinch hit means, but the rest are what matters at the moment. So, we need to find a way to try and avoid all of those threatened hits up on the AI player's board. And there is a relatively easy way to do that. Let's get our player Nomo, out on the field. I kept thinking that was an M. I apparently don't have the right glasses on. So, this guy will reduce all the hits by 1 base. So we want to do that. So let's reduce all of his hits by 1 base. So normally, we would get 2 guys out on singles and then a double to end it off and he'd get a couple of runs in and be bloody annoying. But now that we can reduce some of the hits, we can get rid of the 2 singles because they'd be reduced to nothing, and then we have 1 single left. But then it passes back to the opponent's player. I just realized I didn't even fix the focus there, goddammit. Now it would go back to the other player, and his threatened hits go through. So we move him up there. His threatened hit gets through, and now he's got 1 man on base, as opposed to the 3 that he would have had before. I'll take it. And so therefore, it comes back to us, and we now get to threaten our hits. So we threaten a triple on the blue. Very simple. And now, it's the opponent's turn. They get to turn up a card, although if they were an actual human player, they'd get a hand of cards they get to play around with. Now, he gets the effect first, so we cancel all hits versus a natural. However, we aren't a natural, we are a cyborg, so that doesn't do anything. And therefore, we get all of our threatened hits to go off. So, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So we get a run in, and we get a run. And then he gets to threaten his own hit, which is going to be a home run, which will be entirely painful if we aren't careful. But that's a basic run. That's a basic inning. What the really cool thing about the way this game works is that you've got a sort of attacking and defending sort of thing going on with most deck builders, right? Take any traditional deck builder you know of, like Star Realms, Hero Realms, Shards of Infinity, Ascension. Most cards only have one effect, whether it be offensive or defensive, like dealing damage, getting your health back, getting you something off the road, something along those lines, you know what I mean? But in this game, every card pulls double duty, both offensively in taking out your opponent's runs and getting your runs started, getting your base runners started, I should say. Or it's defensive, whether it be cancelling theirs or preventing yours from being cancelled or what have you. And almost every single card is like this, in a sense. So you got a robot here, which has a similar sort of thing, but he's got a offensive effect as opposed to the defensive effect we've currently got going on down on the field there. And of course, not every game is like this. There are 4 starter decks that players can choose from that aren't very good, that sometimes only have like defensive effects or offensive, that sometimes only have the effect or the threat and runs, not both. And of course, as a deck builder, so at the end of your 6 innings, once you've played all of your cards, you can use the green values in order to determine how much you spend. So let's just say, for example, we got 4 points here. Let's just get those visible in the bottom left corner there for you. 7, 8, and then 10 for the 2 there. So we have 10 points to spend, and we have to trade out players that we currently have for players that we don't have. So if I wanted to buy Sia, for example, I could buy him, but then I would need to banish a card down to the minor leagues, which is what you do by shoving the card underneath there. So as a result, you end up just slowly building up your team. But there is also a ton of strategy in slowly building up your team this way. Whoops, sorry, I don't mean to keep knocking you over, Mr. Base Runner, it just keeps happening. But there is a ton of strategy in this game in relation to the whole baseball thing, because the mythology of this universe is kind of whack. So in 2036, they decided to shorten the games to 6 innings, which is why you only have hands of 6 cards. Makes sense, not just because 9 cards are kind of uncomfortable to hold at times. But then you have cyborg players. Cyborg players are your pitchers, and they have robot arms, and they are really powerful. And then the MLB were like, this isn't working very well, just because the cyborgs are so powerful that all of the batters aren't really getting much done. So they introduced robots. And robots are your big hitters. They are capable of slamming the most ones away. But as a result, this mythology actually bleeds through to the way that the strategy works, because your robots are often your big hitters. They've usually got multiple hits going on. They're usually really big hits, like you got 2 home runs on this robot, or this guy's got a single and a triple hit, but they're fast runners. Fast runners are the Reds. They can go at double the speed. So if they hit a single, they actually move 2 bases. Average runners can move at a normal speed. So a single is 1, a double is 2, a triple is 3. But if they're on the second base and a single gets hit specifically, they basically get to run that straight in. So they are better than most... God damn it, I hate knocking over that base runner. I'm sorry, Mr. Base Runner. But they get to... they are a fair bit better, because you don't want them getting to the second base, because if they do, they can easily score runs. And then you just got your regular old slow runners. And every single card in the game that threatens a hit has a different runner speed. So there's just this really neat balance going on between your robots, which are the best hitters, your cyborgs, which are the best pitchers and are really good for defending against certain kinds of people, and then you've got your naturals, who are the best, still manage to be the best fielders in the entirety of the MLB, despite the fact that they're entirely human. And they're usually not great on the hitting, but they usually have the ability to do things like cancel hits. And it all ends up being a really big balancing act. You don't want to have too much offense in terms of making threatened hits, but you also don't want to have too much defense in the way of cancelling hits, because you'll never get proper hits out yourself. And it works really well in that sense. And there are a couple of other things you can do as well, which are representative of baseball. Like, you can decide to shove a card on deck, which is just putting a card face down here. But if you decide to discard a card that has the pinch hitter symbol in the bottom left corner there, you can choose to bring out your on-deck card and use that instead. And of course, the game does have a sort of visitor and home team mechanic, and the person who goes first will have the opportunity to flip the top card of their deck, execute the defensive effect, and hopefully it'll do something like, say, cancel a home run at the last minute that would otherwise lose you the game. And of course, you got extra innings where each player will draw 3 cards if the game's tied, and they will just continue playing and see how things go like that. And it's just a really clever representation of baseball, because, like, not only is it, like, just a decent game system, but it's also baseball highlights. So it's actually a really clever usage of the idea, because all these cards are meant to represent single innings. So these guys are meant to be your hits for the entire inning. I know it's a minor thing, it's just kind of thematic more than anything else, but it just works really well in emulating that aspect of the game without having each game take 5 hours and you end up falling asleep at the third hour. And so, every 6 cards you play, you get a winner, you win a game, you play 7 games in a row, you're slowly building up your deck, you're becoming better as you go, and it's just really clever. It's really well done. The gameplay works almost exactly as it wants to, and it's a really fun game to play. There are a couple of problems I have with it though. Admittedly, it is kind of ugly. I don't know what it is about this art. It does the job, and sometimes it makes me laugh. Like, look at this thing. This is like steampunk on a budget. It's great. But admittedly, whether it be the character art, the art on the field, or just even on the back of these cards, man, it's not a very pleasant game to look at in the long term, and it doesn't do the best job of selling its theme. Admittedly, the best part of the art itself is on the game's cover, which is also kind of weird because it has him being displayed in the billboard, then has him being displayed in the billboard again. It's really strange, admittedly. Tom Vassell was absolutely right on that front. Also, admittedly, I don't like the size of the box, which I know is a weird complaint to have, but when the box is this big and all the cards in the game only take up like not even all of this space here, it feels a bit excessive. There is a reason for that though. It's because this game's got an absolute ton of expansions, but the expansions overall cost more than the bloody game does. And admittedly, that doesn't even fill the box at all, because the expansions only have like 120 cards. So even then you wouldn't even fill up half the box. That's because the game's got something like 24 starter teams. So you would have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24 starter teams. And then the rest would just be on this side. So in order to actually use all the space you're given in the box, you need to buy all of the expansions. And admittedly, there are some people which will be like, oh, that's great, because I hate trying to fit everything into one box and this is perfect. But at the same time, this game's only got 120 cards. You could easily make the game like 1/3 of the box size and still have it be relatively portable, because it's actually kind of hard to get a box this size around, and when there's so little in it, it feels almost inexcusable. At least you can understand why they did it. There is also, well, I was going to say that there's also the content here, but the content here isn't actually a downside to me. Although, admittedly, you only get 60 cards, which serve as the custom players you bring along outside of the regular teams, which is not much. You'll see them all within a few games, and if you want to start really adding some extra strategic diversity, you're going to need to start adding the expansions in, and the expansions do add a bunch of really cool abilities. Although that does kind of kick the AI deck in the dick, because to make the AI deck for the solo play, you take the 60 cards, you shuffle them up, and you draw 15 of them, and that's the AI deck, and then you just play against that deck. You do as many buy rounds as you want before you start the game. I usually do 3, and the games often end up being really close as a result. But if you start adding more cards into that, especially ones that go off at a certain time, the deck starts to be a little bit diluted, and it's not exactly the best result if you want to play this game solo, because there is... Hang on. He's got a card in here somewhere which is perfect for demonstrating this. There it is. So, this card here, lead off. If this is your first card play, you get an immediate single, but the AI doesn't know to do that. So sometimes it can just come up being a little bit iffy on the strategy. But when you're working with the base deck of 60, it's still absolutely fine, and the solo mode is actually great for how simple it is. It's literally just get 15 cards, deal them out. Flip one up every time you need the AI to respond to something, and that's it for the most part. And you can still have a really good time trying to not only learn his team, but fend off his team by making your own purchases over here in the market. So I can't argue against their general gameplay model here. And it's also worth noting that the game actually comes with, as I already said, 4 starter teams. But you also get 4 boards, so you can use it in order to have, like, tournaments where 2 players go up against each other, another 2 players go up against each other. They both get their own unique rows from the market deck, and you just have a full-blown tournament, which is great. I've got nothing wrong with that approach. So yeah, as a result, I really do like Baseball Highlights 2045. The base gameplay mechanic of having cards that have 2 different effects on both the offensive and the defensive side, or sometimes 2 offensive, makes the game's strategy really unique. It really does sell that theme it's got going on, with all of the different types of players that you can have. Robots, which are really good at hitting, cyborgs, which are really good at pitching, and naturals, which are really good at fielding, and they have abilities that back up this theme. It even goes so far as to have a really weird detail where all of the players that are natural, that are still humans basically, have these unique names which are taken from 2 different names from a baseballer from the pre-2036 days. So you'll have references like Babe Bench, which at least I got one of those references, I'll tell you that much. And it does a really good job at emulating the back and forth of baseball with these thread and hits and this whole every card is an inning sort of thing, where these are the 2 hits that you get throughout the hit that they can immediately cancel with like a really good pitcher or something like that. It gets that back and forth feeling of baseball going really well with such a simple set of mechanics. And the overall quality of the presentation, while let down a bit by the quality of the art, is actually kind of helped out by the cards. They're really thick and quite just durable and sturdy. You don't have to worry too much about ruining these cards right out of the box. And the gameplay it offers, whether it be head-to-head with 2 players, a 4-player tournament, or just going up solo against the AI with a really simple setup system of dealing 15 cards from the market to another deck for their deck, and then just giving yourself a few buy rounds so that you have a potential chance at it, and then just going at it, dealing a new card out every time, is really good. It's just kind of let down by the fact that you need to at least understand baseball in order to be able to get anything out of this. And the fact that it's not the prettiest game in the world. And the fact that it's box and its cost is bloody huge. Like, this bloody box, like 120 cards and a few pawns, as you can see in the background there for the runners, was something like $75 for me in Australian, which is kind of a bit much for this sort of game. But at least I wasn't buying the expansions, which only adds like 120 cards, but that costs $100, which is just ridiculous. It's a bit over the top. And when you've got this big box here and a somewhat limited, but not massively, market deck here encouraging you to buy more cards in order to have the games be filled with more strategy, it can feel like a tiny bit much. But the game itself is still rock solid, and I absolutely appreciate it for what it does. And if you're even remotely a fan of baseball and board games, why don't you have this yet? Go buy it. It's fantastic at what it does. This has been Blue Maxima, and I'll see you all next time.